The work we have here is our medieval manuscript of the type known as a Book of Hours. This one's known colloquially as the Fisher Hours or the Hours of Anne de la Routier, who was the second owner of the manuscript, not the first, but for some reason her name has been recorded and that of the original owner hasn't. Books of Hours are probably the most common surviving form of medieval manuscript and may even be the most common surviving medieval artefact in some cases. A lot of people will be familiar with them because of the very luxurious art books which are produced which illustrate these works. Books of Hours were most commonly written in the 15th century in places like Italy, France and Netherlands, the Low Countries. And they're often highly decorated and very elaborate works. It's probably unfortunate that a lot of the bibliographies have concentrated on the really deluxe examples, so people think they belong to either the rich or the great. In fact, every literate person in the Middle Ages would have aspired to own one of these. Probably even illiterate people as well, because they were status symbols, and they're mentioned specifically in wills as being bequeathed as parts of people's personal property. They were significant and valued items. The amount of usage they display varies from volume to volume. It's probably true that more deluxe examples were kept as precious items and plain or simple examples were used as everyday occurrences. You could probably even carry them around with you in a small bag attached to your girdle or whatever, which you could then take out and read at the appropriate hours. What they were was a series of prayers and psalms and recitations which are read at the 8 canonical hours of the day, which were Matins, Lauds, Prime, Tierce, Sext, None, Vespers and Compline. The central text of the book is this one here. This is the Little Hours of Our Lady, or the Hours of the Virgin, from whence the book derives its name, a Book of Hours. And these are all introduced by pictures, which are known as miniatures, related to the Christmas story. Here we have the miniature associated with the hours of Matins, which is the first canonical hour of the day, and we have the Annunciation to the Virgin that she's bearing the Christ child. And in the rondelles around the outside of the page you see various scenes associated with the life of the Virgin. It then goes on to the next hour, the Hour of Lauds, will have the Visitation with St Elizabeth, and Matins will have the Nativity and so on and so on. So even a person who couldn't read the text could, by a mnemonic association with the picture, then recite the prayers and various other antiphons and versicles and responses that were associated with the hours. The other essential text in a Book of Hours, apart from the hours themselves, was the calendar, which you see here. In very deluxe examples, it is associated with, you'll often get pictures associated with the labours of the month. In this one you have a decorated panel border and the actual liturgical calendar which sets out the feast days of the saints. They can be written in red or blue or gold. Blue would be a standard feast day. A more important one would be written in red, indicating a red letter day, which is where we get our expression from. The other part of the calendar, apart from the liturgical listing of the saints' days, are these two columns, which are called the golden number and the dominical letter. And these are how you work out the sequence of feast days by relating them back to the occurrence of Easter. Other texts in the volume would depend on how much money you had to spend. You'd go along to your bookseller and say you wanted a Book of Hours. You would then specify how much money you wanted to spend and what texts you wanted in it and how you would have them decorated. Apart from the Hours of the Virgin, it was usually only common to provide one miniature at the beginning of each of the next of the texts. So here we have the miniature associated with a sequence of prayers and recitations called the Vigils of the Dead. Again, this is a very 15th century phenomenon. It has associations with the Dance of Death and Memento Mori, especially linked to the rise of things like the Black Death, where you could go out in the morning and be perfectly healthy and come home at night and die, basically. Here, the interesting one about this illumination is it shows the original owner of the book, who's shown here on the left, and with the black wimple. She would have been the person who commissioned it, because it was quite common for these to be owned by women. And it was also quite common for the owner of the book to be included in it in some way. So she occurs here at the hours of the vigils of the dead, at a Pietà, where it's shown Christ being taken down from the cross. She's shown here assisting the Virgin. Her name was also Anne, but we don't know anything else about her. The second owner of the book, Anne de la Routière, was included in a series of illuminations which were added later in a much cruder style. She was a nun in a hostel called the Convent of God in Paris, and she's shown here assisting at an exorcism where you can see a small demon being cast out. The decoration of the book is typically French in style. It includes a lot of, the panel borders include plants and insects and birds, and various decoration of gold throughout. The gold is 22 karat gold, so it's fairly soft. But that is not the most precious thing in the manuscript. The most precious thing is the blue here, which is always associated with the depiction of the Virgin Mary. This was made from crushed lapis lazuli, which is imported in great expense from Afghanistan through Central Asia, Turkey and across to Italy and southern Europe. So it was an intensely expensive material to use. It was crushed and infused with wine and the colour drained off. And the first crushing or infusion was always associated with depictions of the Virgin, as you have here in the Annunciation, with the shepherds visiting. This is the actual nativity, so this is the hours of prime, which is perhaps the most important hour in the book for most people. Most people wouldn't be up early enough in the morning to read the prayers for Matins and Lauds, but they'd certainly be around for prime. And prime hence becomes associated with the beginning to read, or the word primer we use today for a first reading book. The animals depicted in the borders also have religious symbolism. Often with the Virgin Mary you'll have a depiction of a pelican, which is a medieval symbol for maternal love, because it's supposed to have pricked its breast to feed its own young. Other ones you will have it throughout the book. You have dragonflies and grasshoppers. This is the Magi here. And in other things like the penitential psalms, which is shown here, another text which could be added depending on how much money you wanted to spend, you have a miniature depicting David at prayer. And in the base here you will have Bathsheba in her bath, or in other versions you'll have Uriah the Hittite being sent into battle, showing David's faults and his great sin. And because David's great sin was the sin of lust, they will show the medieval symbol of lust, which was a monkey down here in the border. The work itself is written on vellum, which is treated calf skin. And it probably took somewhere between about 6 to 8 months to produce in a standard workshop. All of these miniatures you see would have been done by copyists, the master of the workshop. In this case, it's a workshop he's called the master of the Horloge de Sapience, he's named after the first painting known to have been done by him. He would have prepared a master copy, and you would have a team of copyists who would work from that, so they could produce these pages relatively quickly. You would have someone writing out the text, you would have a second person doing the rubrication, which is adding the letters in red, and then you would have an illuminator who would be doing the decorated pages, which could be inserted and the text written. Some cases you have text written on the back of them, in other cases that's not always the case, they would just insert the page. So you had a whole team working fairly quickly to produce these things, so which is where we get our time, about 6 to 8 months to do it. It wouldn't take years and years to produce like other medieval manuscripts of earlier periods. It was very much a mass production device. This is probably one of the 2 finest books of Hours in Australia. The other one is the Warncliffe Hours, which is in Victoria, in the gallery down there. And it's a widely known book and has been commented on extensively. Would have had a number of owners during her lifetime, and it was given to the library in 1968 by the friends of the library who purchased it as a gift.